IBESS Ecosystems and Ecology 2, Part 3, continues our study of community ecology. Community ecology examines groups of populations, different species, living and interacting in a common habitat. This movie will have its focus on animal-plant interaction, known as herbivory, predator-prey interaction, and symbioses, specifically mutualism and parasitism. Here's the outline for Ecosystems and Ecology, Topic 2 in the IBESS syllabus. Use this outline to find the part you need. This movie has its focus here. Here's the outline of topics within community ecology. We're focused here looking at interactions. Part 2 looked at competition, while Part 3, this movie, is looking at these interactions: herbivory, predator-prey, and symbioses. Here's our first IB syllabus statement. Describe and explain with examples population interactions, including herbivory and predation. Here is a photograph of herbivory, an animal ingesting plant material. This is the Galapagos tortoise, Chelenoidus nigra. Here is another photograph of herbivory, a photograph that displays the impact of insect herbivory on plants. And another image of herbivory, animal ingesting plant. Herbivory has a significant impact on plants, and the evidence can be seen here in this graph that shows the number of seeds produced by plants when voles, a local herbivore, were present or absent from experimental quadrats. Now, the experiment on the left of this graph looked at plants favored by voles, and you can see that the plants produced many more seeds when the voles were excluded. The experiment on the right looked at the impact of voles on plants not typically eaten by voles. For plants not favored by voles, there's really no significant difference in the number of seeds produced whether the voles are excluded or not. Here is similar evidence to demonstrate the impact of herbivory on plants. The height of plants is significantly greater when voles are excluded than when they are present. Interestingly enough, when voles are present, the other plants fare better because voles are feeding on the preferred plants, giving the plants that are not preferred an advantage. Let's move on to predator-prey relationships. In these photographs, we can see some classic examples of predator-prey relationships: the cheetah and the wildebeest, the lynx and the hare, the grizzly bear and the salmon. The predator has an impact on the size of the prey population, and the availability of prey for the predator influences the size of the predator population. The presence of one species is important in holding the population of the other species around carrying capacity. Here is a leopard preying on an antelope. The presence of one species is important in holding the population of the other species around carrying capacity. The predator has an impact on the size of the prey population, and the availability of prey for the predator influences the size of the predator population. Here are other predator-prey images. It's important for you to think about all possible predator-prey relationships beyond the obvious, such as the snake preying on a frog, an insect preying on other insects, and a spider capturing insects in its web. This graph displays a generalized relationship of predator-prey interaction in terms of their numbers over time. You can see the oscillation of each population in a steady-state equilibrium around their respective carrying capacity. The oscillations seen here are evidence of negative feedback, and predator-prey interactions are good examples of the mechanism of negative feedback. As the prey in green increases, the predator in gray increases. But notice the slight time lag. Predator numbers increase after prey numbers increase. It takes time for the predator to feed and then translate the food into more offspring. This is a biological time lag seen in all predator-prey relationships. Then, the increasing numbers of predators cause prey numbers to decline. Once the prey numbers decline, predator numbers decline. Then when predator numbers are low enough, the prey will increase, and the predator numbers follow, always with a time lag. Here's a graphical representation, a model of a predator-prey interaction. The prey is the yeast with the solid line, and the predator is paramecium with the dotted line. Both populations display a J-shaped growth curve early in time, positive feedback, exponential growth, but within a couple of days, the negative feedback mechanism, typical of predator-prey relationships, begins to play a role. The prey population increases. The predator population also increases with a slight time lag. Then, with increasing numbers of predators, the prey population declines. Then the predator population declines. Then the prey numbers increase, and then the predator numbers increase, etc. Each population oscillates around their respective carrying capacity. Here is data from the Hudson Bay Trading Company in Canada displaying the number of lynx and hare pelts purchased over a period of time, a very long period of time. The first thing to notice is the steady state oscillation of each population, presumably around some carrying capacity. The original graph was color-coded so the reader could distinguish the predator lynx from the prey hare. But can you distinguish which curve belongs to which species? The curve with the regularly larger numbers would be the hare, the prey. If you're not sure why, think back to numbers pyramids, which typically have larger numbers of primary consumers supporting smaller numbers of secondary consumers. This curve represents the hare, and this one represents the lynx. Notice the time lag between the initial increase in the population of the hare followed by the increase in the population of the lynx. The regularity of the oscillations in combination with the long period of time over which the data was collected make the data presented here very compelling as data supporting the predator-prey relationship. But if you're thinking carefully about this data, you should feel some skepticism. The Hudson Bay Trading Company bought and sold pelts, the skins of dead animals brought to them by hunters. The numbers presented here are not numbers of living animals in the wild collected by scientists. The data comes from hunters who killed the animals by the thousands, thus influencing the size of the very population we imagine we're studying when we examine data such as this. Are the number of pelts brought to the Hudson Bay Trading Company an accurate, yet indirect sample of the number of animals present in the wild? Maybe. But this data is a fine place for you to exercise some skepticism, or at least some careful thought. Here's our last look at a predator-prey relationship, two populations interacting to maintain each population around carrying capacity through negative feedback mechanisms. I like this graph because they distinguish the numbers of the two species on separate axes, the prey, Eotranicus, along the y-axis, and the predator, Typhlodromus, along this y-axis. This is appropriate as the number of individuals in the ecosystem will be quite different for each species, so to place their respective numbers on the same axis may be misleading. As Eotranicus increases, Typhlodromus numbers follow. As Eotranicus numbers decline, Typhlodromus numbers follow, with a time lag. The biotic factors in an ecosystem include all of these interactions, but with this slide, let's move to look at symbioses. Symbioses include mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. You can see that I've provided a shorthand notation for each relationship. Mutualism is a plus-plus where each species benefits from the interaction. Parasitism and disease are plus-minus where one species benefits but the other species is weakened. And commensalism is a +0 where one species benefits but the other is not helped or harmed by the interaction. I won't spend too much time on commensalism. Is this an example of symbiotic mutualism? Here's the important IB syllabus statement relevant to mutualism. Describe and explain with examples population interactions, including mutualism and parasitism. Mutualism is defined as a relationship between individuals of two or more species in which all benefit and none suffer. Cleaner shrimp clean the skin and teeth of these moray eels. The shrimp receive food while the eels are cleaned of parasites and potentially disease-causing organisms. Clownfish and the anemone have a mutualistic relationship. The clownfish will ward off other fish that might do harm to the anemone, and the clownfish is protected from predators by the anemone that has stinging cells in its tentacles. The crocodile gets parasites removed from its mouth by the bird, and the bird receives food. Both species gain from the interaction. The bee receives food as pollen and in turn distributes the pollen to other plants as part of the fertilization process important to the plant. These birds pick off ticks and other parasites, receiving nutrition in the process. The antelope benefits from having less parasitism, less disease. Here's an interesting example of biotic interactions. Leafcutter ants harvest plant material, herbivory, and take the leaves back to the nest where they chew the leaves with saliva and provide the mash to a fungus that grows within the nest. The ants then eat the fungus. The fungus would not survive without the ants, even though the ants eat the fungus. Parasitism is the second symbiotic interaction among populations within a community. Parasitism is a plus-minus relationship where one species gains at the expense of another. In this image, we can see examples of parasites that have infected a host organism. We can see a tick butting into the skin. The tick itself withdraws blood and further transmits other organisms to the host that cause disease. These are trypanosome parasites that cause sleeping sickness. Leeches withdraw blood from their host. Tapeworms infect the guts of mammals, taking food from the host. And guinea worms similarly take nutrients from the host that they infect. Here are some other interesting examples of parasitism. The cuckoo bird lays its egg in the nest of another species, the mother of which raises the cuckoo chick. Fungus, seen here on the edges of these leaves, can be parasitic on plants. Mistletoe is a parasitic plant that infects other plants by boring into the sap and extracting nutrients. And dodder is another parasitic plant that infects other plants, extracting nutritive saps of these other plants. Here are some definitions. Parasitism is a relationship between two species in which one species, the parasite, lives on or in another, the host, gaining all or much of its food from it. A disease is when one species, the pathogen, lives in or on another, the host, gaining all or much of its food from it. Disease, just like parasitism, is the plus-minus interaction between species. This is a photograph of ticks about to infect a mammal. Rust is a type of fungus that infects plants, causing disease. The last symbiotic interaction, an interaction on which I will not elaborate, is commensalism, a plus-zero relationship where one species gains from the presence of the other, but the second species is neither harmed nor helped. In this photograph, the egret easily finds food as the cow moves through the environment, kicking up insects. In this example, the cow gains nothing from the relationship. And that brings our analysis of symbiotic relationships to an end, on to examine the unique roles of certain species, species known as keystone species. Keystone species are species whose role is vital to the survival of other species in the ecosystem. Without the keystone species, other species in the ecosystem are likely to disappear, and the ecosystem becomes less diverse. I've provided you with photographs of arches here that have a keystone in the center of the arch. The keystone, by virtue of its shape and its position, is critical to the integrity of the arch. Without the keystone, the arch falls apart. Without the keystone species in a community, the ecosystem holds together less well, is less diverse. The first example of a keystone species is the sea otter. The sea otter eats urchins, and the urchins eat kelp, the producer in the system. In ecosystems where the otter has been removed, the urchins bloom and consume all the kelp. The ecosystem collapses. Pisaster, a starfish, is a keystone species. Pisaster feeds on mussels, and without Pisaster, the mussels bloom, reducing the algae in the system. Without algae as a producer in the ecosystem collapses. Now I'd like you to consider ecological engineers as keystone species. For example, prairie dog burrows provide the nesting areas for birds such as plovers or owls. Tunnel systems channel rainwater to prevent runoff and erosion and can serve to change the composition of the soil by increasing aeration, good for decomposers. Without the prairie dog as a keystone ecological engineer, the system is not as diverse. Grizzly bears are ecological engineers because grizzly bears transfer nutrients from the aquatic ecosystem to the forest ecosystem. Salmon are rich in nitrogen, sulfur, carbon, and phosphorus, and they swim up rivers from the ocean. Bears capture the salmon and disperse nutrient-rich feces and partially eaten carcasses to the land. African elephants are ecological engineers because they uproot trees, making room for the grass species that support the grazing herbivores. How might the ecosystem change without the elephant? Beavers are ecological engineers because they transform a stream into a pond, transforming the entire ecosystem with species that can only be supported by the still water of a pond. In a community, different species play different but uniquely important roles. For example, the tiger is a large animal requiring many square kilometers of territory. Because of its demand for large tracts of unspoiled habitat, many other species also survive if the tiger survives. The tiger might be called an umbrella species. And let's not forget the unique role of decomposers in the ecosystem. Decomposers break large organic molecules of dead organisms into smaller inorganic molecules. Without decomposers, it's said that the world would be littered with the carcasses of every organism that had ever lived and died. And that brings us to the end of IBESS Ecosystems and Ecology 2, Part 3, on to succession in Parts 4 and 5.